to begin the day by thanking our generous sponsors, Z, our title partner. Please go to Z's stall for the author book signing. Nexa, the associate partner and venue partner, Front Lawn. Bank of Baroda, venue partner, Betak. Motwani Jadeja Foundation, venue partner, Darbar Hall. Rajasthan Tourism, our tourism partner. The JCB Prize for Literature Festival Bookstore, managed by Full Circle. Aga Khan Foundation, our series partner. Rekit Benkisa, official cause partner. Diageo, celebration partner. AirAsia, our travel partner. Kingfisher, Good Times partner. Red FM, official radio partner. Lonchora, podcast partner. Facebook, community partner. Be Live, webcast partner. UFO Movies, Cinemedia partner. Save the Children book launch. Pratham Books, outreach partner. Our series partners, the North India Office, US Embassy, New Delhi, and Mahindra World City, Jaipur. Our session partners, British Council, Netflix, Etsy, Public Health Engineering Department, United Nations India, Avid Learning, Murthy Classical Library of India of Harvard University Press, Australian High Commission and Australia Council for the Arts, Paras Biltech, Sahitya Akademi, Center for Policy Research. Our media partners, Dainik Bhaskar, Rajasthan Patrika, Amar Ujala, Business Standard, Inox, Mathrubhumi, Outlook Magazine, The New India Express, Indian Express, The Tribune. A big thank you to Jen Mikalski, Zomato, DLF, Penguin Random House, Jayashree Perwal International School, Citibank, Storytel, CK Birla Hospital, LIC, Sotheby's, SBI, John L. Bissell Foundation, JW Marriott, Airtel, Karma Kettle, Grover Zampa, Coca-Cola, Gulmohar Lane, Hotel Diggi Palace, Taj Rambagh Palace, Clark's Amer, Royal Opera House Mumbai, The Lalit, Full Circle, Yuva Ekta Foundation, Royal Treasure, Event Boat, Edelman, Social Connect, McCain, Unibic, Wag Bakri Tea, Maskin, Kanha Sweets, and Be Live. We are delighted to introduce session 81, Istanbul, A Tale of Three Cities, presented by Aga Khan Foundation. We have Tom Holland, the author of a range of prize-winning books on ancient and medieval history. He's also presented to the world a number of TV documentaries on topics ranging from dinosaurs to ISIS. Please join me in welcoming Tom Holland. It is also my pleasure and honor to welcome the lady of the hour, the award-winning historian, author, and broadcaster, Bettany Hughes. Let's hear it for the two of them.
Thank you very much. And yes, it is my great pleasure to introduce, it's just been said, the lady of the hour, Bettany Hughes, broadcaster, historian, author of, chasing the microphone here, author of a whole range of books, Helen of Troy, Socrates, Aphrodite, and you may notice a theme there. They're all on ancient Greece. And Bettany is herself pretty much like a heroine from a Greek myth. She's just come from filming a series on the Odyssey. And like Odysseus, she's been hit by a series of heroic calamities. She survived an earthquake. She got caught up in a thunderstorm, and worst of all, she dropped her iPhone into the Aegean. So we're very, very lucky that she made it here to talk about another topic on a Greek theme, the great city of Byzantium, which then, of course, became the Roman city of Constantinople, and now is the Turkish city of Istanbul. So an incredible history of an incredible city told by an incredible presenter, Bettany. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tom. He failed to mention I also lost my clothes in the Aegean. So you'll see me walking around the festival in one outfit that I borrowed. So I apologise to everybody for my sartorial unity. How lovely to see you. Thank you so much for being here on this perfect Rajasthan morning. I will attempt to bring a bit of Eastern Mediterranean sunshine into the room today because, as Tom said, my subject is indeed Istanbul, the world's desire, the queen of cities, some say the greatest city on earth. Obviously, Jaipur is the greatest city on earth. But what I want to do is to really kind of interrogate those extraordinary hyperbolic claims and to see why it is that Istanbul matters. And I'll kind of lay my cards on the table. I think there is a particular reason. So it's not just because of its deep history and its cultural splendor, nor indeed the fact that it consistently races up the political agenda. So it took me 10 years to write this book. And oh my goodness, I had to rewrite the introduction and the conclusion a number of times because I was there caught up in coups and riots and protests and terrorist attacks. So it is a city that is a kind of magnet for human energy and dynamism. So it's not just because of all of those reasons. But there's something else, that I think it's a city that has supported and witnessed such an extraordinary range, a diverse range of human experience, that it teaches us how we can do this crazy thing that we do of living together, whether it be in a village or a town or a city, kind of really what makes us us, what makes a city what it is, and how we do this cohabitation thing with other humans. So this is going to be my theme of the morning. You have to forgive me, because as I said, it took 10 years to write the book. It's about 800,000 years of history, and I've got 40 minutes. So I'm going to be rattling through. But what I really wanted to share with you is a lot of the new archaeology that tells us about this city and about its context in the wider world. So that's my plan for this morning. Before I start, though, I just wanted to share a very brief story with you. So I have two daughters. And I find that I cannot write about history unless I go to the place where it happened. So I think it's physically impossible. If someone was writing a biography of you, you'd want them to spend a bit of time in your company, and I think it's the same of going to the geographical location of where history happens. So I've travelled a lot to Istanbul, and I remember once announcing to my two teenage daughters that we were going to do yet another 3-week historical walking tour of Istanbul, and watching their shoulders sink slightly. So I thought, okay, I've got to kind of mix things up a bit. I think this is kind of, daughter abuse. I'm giving them too much history. So I said, okay, well, this time we're going to take a boat. We're going to go across the beautiful Sea of Marmara on the trail of an extraordinary woman, the Empress Theodora. I'm going to be talking more about her later, but Theodora is really my heroine from history, a remarkable character who starts right at the bottom of the pile in the gutter and ends up the empress in charge of the Byzantine Empire of 1 million square miles. And because she'd had this incredible trajectory, Theodora, in the 6th century AD, my goodness, she wanted the world to know that she was a champion in terms of social mobility. And she loved baths, Theodora. So she used to travel from Constantinople across the Sea of Marmara to these beautiful hot spring baths in Bursa. And because she was very keen for people to realize how far she'd come, she used to go to have a bath with no fewer than 4,000 courtiers. So it's quite a public bath, this. So I said, let's go. We'll follow Theodora. We'll go to these baths in Bursa, still working as hot spring baths. I turned up. Slightly stupidly, I don't quite know why I hadn't computed this. Because they are working hot spring baths and are still in use, they're mainly occupied by men at the moment. But I travelled all this way with my daughters. I thought, I can't turn back once I'm there. So I did a sort of ridiculous kind of manoeuvre. I found a screen, walked along like this, behind the screen, to go and peer into the baths. What I'd also not computed, it's incredibly dense, is because they are hot spring baths, of course all the men inside them were naked. So I looked like this terrible kind of middle-aged peeping Thomasina with my, incredibly acutely embarrassed teenage daughters behind me. But I averted my eyes from what I shouldn't be seeing, and it was a remarkable moment because there were these 6th century baths in use as they had been by Theodora. So I'd achieved my aim. But when I travelled back to Istanbul, I found, as I was crossing the Sea of Marmara on the ferries, looking at the television, the city that I'd left in peace was on fire. So these were the Taksim Square riots and protests of 2013. Are we okay? Perfect, very good, yeah. Tom is slightly taller than me, and you may have noticed. And cars were turned upside down, there were riot police on the streets, but where I was staying. So I had to take my daughters, saying to them, look, this is history in the making, we have to get home. So sort of, we might die, but kind of, buckle down, because it will be a remarkable moment to witness. And I should tell you that one of them has terrible asthma. And as we arrived in Taksim Square, the tear gas was released. And I should think my daughter with asthma, her face sort of went the blue of the cover of the book. And I remember saying to her, look, I'm really sorry. Can you breathe? Because I need to go and see this particular bit of graffiti, which I'd noticed. So hopefully, has this come up on screen? Have you got an image on? Is it coming? Okay. So here we go. So this was the bit of historical graffiti that I wanted to see before my daughter died. It's just sprayed on a shop window, and as you can see, it says Istanbul, Byzantium, Constantinople, Bizim is ours. And isn't that an incredible thing that in this moment of high octane action where people were losing their lives, somebody had taken a moment out to make a historical statement on a window. And what they were saying is that Istanbul, Byzantium, Constantinople is a city that belongs to its citizens. It's a city that is connected across time by place. And that really matters, because it's a city that almost is such an extraordinary character in and of itself. It's always matched the power of its rulers. It's protean and poetic. It has this incredible history of protest. There are constantly protests through the story of Istanbul from the 5th century AD onwards. And one of the great chroniclers of the city, Niketis Choniates, in the 12th century AD, said, this population of the marketplace, its indifference to its rulers as though it were inborn. So this is a kind of character of the city. So if we're going to look at the city, we have to look at its people, because physically, physiologically, etymologically, a city is its citizens. A city is the people that make it up, that the mood of men make a city. So I'm just going to take you on this whistle-stop tour of the people, the men and women of Istanbul, through their new archaeology. And we will begin right at the beginning, right back in prehistory. So what you're looking at here, ladies and gentlemen, incredibly cruelly, when I showed this image in Oxford a couple of weeks ago, somebody asked me whether it was an avocado holder. Not an avocado holder, something far more splendid and exciting than that. So what you're looking at here is a footprint from 8,000 years ago. So in the pre-Bosphorus mud around Istanbul, we have 2,000 or so of these incredible footprints from the very earliest inhabitants of the region. This belonged to a man who was wearing a leather shoe. We've also got women's feet footprints and children, because we know that there was this plucky little prehistoric community there who really made a good life for themselves in this very beautiful, bucolic place. And it's something, part of the character of the city, and I think why it's such a magnet for dreams and ideas and politics, is it's a city that's never rejected its natural state. So trees and flowers and this kind of pastoral nature is something that even to today really matters to the city. And oh my goodness, it was like some kind of paradise in prehistory. So we know from the archaeological evidence that there were around 9,000 species of flora there. The men and women who've left their footprints for us would wake up in the morning, eat food off wild cow bone spoons which have been left for us. They would pluck chestnuts and pistachios and figs that grew abundantly, so fresh pistachios for breakfast every morning. They rowed in little wooden canoes, because we've got those left behind in the archaeology, the world's oldest canoe, and they would carefully bury one another in wooden coffins. So we also have, from these new digs in the city, the world's oldest wooden coffin from 8,000 years ago. So it was a kind of tight, beautiful, one can imagine quite hopeful little community right at the very beginning. But then Mother Nature does its bit and throws an extraordinary geoseismic challenge at the people of Istanbul. So what you're looking at here are the prehistoric settlements around the city, and around 5,500 BCE, so 2,000 years or so after that first settlement, there is a shift in sea levels, and 10 cubic miles of water come pouring over the landlip near Istanbul, flooding 600 miles of land. And if you just think about the maths here, in 300 days, the sea level rises by 268 feet. I mean, so that is an absolutely petrifying surge of water pounding down. And what that does is destroy the lives of many. So it flooded those settlements, which is why we have the footprints. But in a way, it created the possibility of Istanbul as a world city, because what it created was the Bosphorus Channel, which you can see on the slide in front. So suddenly, this is a city that is loosely separated in terms of east and west, but is absolutely connected in terms of north and south. And we always have to remember that with this city. It's not just a bridge between east and west, as is constantly said, it's also a connector of north across the Black Sea to Russia and south to Africa. So the creation of the Bosphorus was kind of the breaking, but in a way the making of the city. And just a kind of couple of little facts about that. How many people here have been to Istanbul? Oh, you lovely, angelic crowd. Almost everybody, at least 2/3 of you. So you could come up here and do the lecture then in that case. So you know what I'm talking about. The Bosphorus is a really kind of exciting, quite dangerous stretch of water. Over its 20 miles or so, the current changes direction 9 times. You'll find that sailors are very wary about navigating it, and there's a reason for that. That when it was created 5,500 years ago, there was such a massive rush of material that underneath the Bosphorus, there is a submerged river which runs in the opposite direction to the saltwater channel, which is why you get these strange currents. And if that river were on land, it would be the 6th biggest river in the world. And this was only discovered in 2010. So there's this kind of wonderful double nature, two-way traffic status of the Bosphorus, which in a way to me incarnates the story of the city. It's a place that is desired and desirable, but also dangerous. It kind of encourages, you have to meet it on the front foot. It's a dynamic city, a city with brio. So we have now a city that has the potential to connect north, south, east and west with the advent of the Bosphorus and its new geoseismic landscape. So it's a city that is identified by the waters around it. So a prehistoric city and a city that many people have laid claim to founding. So I popped this in because just as I was writing the book, this beautiful tomb was discovered in the west of the city in a place called Silivri. If you know about Central Asia and the Kyrgyzstan tombs, you can see it's a very typical Central Asian shape, this. And there's a man buried inside, curled over in a kind of embryo position, like that original woman in her wooden coffin had been in the prehistoric city. And rather brilliantly, when this was discovered, the Turks, I'm great friends with the Turks, but some of the Turks said that this proved that Turks from Central Asia had founded the city 6,000 years ago. Obviously not the case because the Turks weren't around then, but it does tell us that there was Central Asian influence in the city very early on. However, the people who claim to have founded the great city of Byzantion were, of course, the Greeks. And as Thomas said, I am a great Hellenophile. I love the Greeks. I love Greek history. They invented history in that they invented the word hysteria, rational inquiry. And because they invented history, boy, they are very good at writing themselves into it. So the Greeks absolutely state that they founded, that adventurers from the mainland, from the city of Megara, sailed out across the Mediterranean and founded the great city of Byzantium. Total rubbish, that there were people there before. Actually, what happens, we think, is that Greeks come and have a kind of peaceful trading arrangement with local Thracians, because the Greek language that turns up in the very earliest evidence from the city has a kind of Thracian dialect to it. So we think there was a kind of merging of communities. But anyway, the Greeks then make this city their own. And as you can see from this, they do all those things that you would expect in a Greek city. There's a marketplace, there are temples, there are ports, there are military training grounds. But the Greeks can never quite Doric column out the easternness of this place. It's always there, kind of in the taste and feel of the city. And we recognize that completely because of the gods and goddesses who are worshipped there. And I'm kind of delighted to say we had a session yesterday on women and how you write women into history and into fiction. I wasn't expecting this when I researched the book, but there's a really fascinating trope with the city that women and the female influence and female characters, mythological and divine, have a really marked presence in the city, and I think that adds to its character. And one of those creatures is this wonderful woman that you have in front of you here, Cybele, the great goddess, the nature goddess, the goddess of life and death, who the Romans called Magna Mater, the Big Mother. And Cybele is a woman not to be messed with. So she always rides with big cats surrounding her, as you can see here. She was thought to physically show the way between the world of the dead and the world of the living. And she was feminine to the power of X. She was so sort of hyper-saturatedly female that her priests, the Galli, in order not to challenge her femaleness, would, cross your legs, gentlemen in the room, would castrate themselves with pottery sherds and decorate. They were very made up. They had long hair, so that they could sort of honour her femaleness. And she's a character who is present in the city right the way from prehistory through the Greek period, even into the Christian period. So Cybele is still worshipped when it becomes a Christian city. So she's vital to the kind of essence of the city, as is this lovely witch goddess Hecate, represented here on a coin from Byzantium, as you can see, from the 1st century. I just popped this in because Hecate is interesting. She's somebody, she turns up in the Medea. She's the witch that Medea summons up. And again, she was a goddess of sort of liminal places, of points of entry and exit, which is why she makes sense for the strategic city of Byzantium. But I also just wanted to show you that Hecate's symbol is always this crescent moon and a star. And again, often Turks will say to me, I don't know why you look at this kind of early history of the city, the pagan history, it's irrelevant to us, and they wave their Turkish flags at me. But actually, the Turkish flags contain the sign of Hecate, of a pagan goddess, which is always slightly embarrassing for people when they discover it. It's an interesting symbol, this. It's a very Eastern symbol. It's adopted by Islam. It comes back into Byzantium as a symbol that's used by the nobles of the 13th and 14th and 15th centuries AD, and then it reappears on the Turkish flag. So Hecate, another kind of female character in the city. As you can imagine, this is a city that is strategic, it's powerful, it's flourishing, it has connectors, as I said, east, west, north and south. And so, of course, after the Greeks, the Romans decide to call it their own. And Pache, Tom Holland, who writes a great deal about Rome, I have to say, I'm more of a fan of the Greeks than I am of the Romans. The Romans are nothing if not opportunists. And they take over the city of Byzantion, they rename it Byzantium, and they make it really a kind of center of Eastern operations. And I think we really need to kind of reconfigure and stop focusing on Rome and realize what a critical city Byzantium is to the Romans. And that is identified by this object that you can see in front of you, arguably the most denuded, sort of slightly embarrassingly rubbish monument from antiquity, given that it was one of the most important monuments from antiquity originally. So if you've been to Istanbul, you'll probably have seen this. It's the Milion, the mile marker, just across from the Hippodrome and Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. Brilliantly neglected now. So at the base of that column is the Roman street level, and if you peer down there, you'll find sort of fag packets and sweet papers and cats giving birth to kittens. But you have to just close your eyes and imagine it in its heyday, this monument, a beautiful monumental stone structure that critically marked the center of the known Roman world. So this was the mother of all mile markers, from which the distance on all Roman roads were measured. So this was kind of ground zero for Rome, and it's not in Rome, it's in Byzantium, it's in the east. So it was a sort of thought of as a kind of centrifugal point of civilization in the Roman mind. All civilization stretched out from here, so all distances were measured from Byzantium. And you can really sense that from the new archaeological finds that are coming here. So it's, as I said, it's strategic. It's a place where you can look out across the world. Many troops are stationed there, and of course, huge amounts of trade. This, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the most extraordinary archaeological remains from Istanbul, recently discovered. And what you're looking at is obviously a boat. It's a wooden boat, and as you know, it's very difficult for wood to be preserved in wet conditions. This is one of 37 complete boats that have been discovered in Istanbul in the new excavations where the Bosphorus has, as you know, has now got 2 tunnels, a road and a rail tunnel. There's the metro system's been revived. And in all that work, which is kind of creating a world-class future for the city, the world-class past of the city has also been revealed. So it's an incredible thing, the preservation of this boat from the Yenikapi digs, and it was from what was originally the Theodosian harbour. So there are boats and the contents of the boats as well. So we have beautiful glassware, a bowl of cherries. In this particular boat, the brazier of the ship's captain with his dinner was discovered. Other things, lots of animal bones, interestingly, so we can get a kind of sense of the city. So this was a place where the Romans brought in big cats to fight in the arena, because this is a good Roman city by this time. So lions and panthers, and even, we think, rhinoceros possibly were brought into Istanbul. And we also know what they ate. So we have donkeys and ostriches and bears who have cut marks on their bones. So we know that the early Istanbulus are eating these animals. And incredibly touchingly, also in this boat, there's a beautiful dog, obviously a pet dog, who was very loved by its owner, and has broken his paw, and his paw has been splintered up again by his owner, kind of tenderly. But then rather tragically, we think the reason that this boat and all of its contents and the other 37 boats are on the bottom of the Bosphorus in the harbour is that there was a tsunami. So the poor dog is kind of loved and then drowns, but you know, it was loved briefly. But it's a brilliant set of findings, very exciting. And in Istanbul right now, there are 90,000 crates of archaeological material waiting to be analysed. So if there are any budding archaeologists in the tent, make your way to Istanbul, because they really need help documenting this material. So it's an incredible find. And very exciting for us historians, because one of the things that was discovered were a whole load of these amphorae of wine in the harbour. And it's brilliant, this, because we know from historical sources that Byzantium was always considered a kind of boozy, bit of a sort of party place, a sort of suburb of sin where a lot of drinking went on. I always think if any of you are familiar in the audience with the city of Brighton in the UK, I always think Istanbul was a bit like an ancient Brighton. You know, kind of what happened in Byzantium stayed in Byzantium, one feels. So as I said, fantastic to have these wonderful amphorae of wine. And we know, as I said, from the historical sources that Byzantium was considered to be this place where you could let your hair down. So, for instance, witness Menander, the wonderful playwright of the 4th century. Byzantium makes all of her merchants drunkards. The whole night through, we were drinking for your sake. And frankly, it was darn strong wine too. At any rate, I rose this morning with a head for 4. Somebody else describes Byzantium as an armpit of a place because you go there dignified and you come back a beggar because of the drinking. And then a poetess of Byzantium, again, interesting that women kind of make their mark on the city in literary terms very early on, this time from the 3rd century BCE, a poetess called Moero. She writes rather more poetically about Byzantium's relationship with booze. Cluster full of drops of Dionysus. You rest indeed under the cover of Aphrodite's golden chambers. No longer will your mother vine throw the beloved vine twig around you. Spring forth the divine leaf over your head. We worship you, Bacchus, Dionysus, here in Byzantium. And just a pub fact for you, I just used the word booze. The word booze actually comes from the city of Istanbul, as it is then, because there was a certain kind of millet beer that was brewed next to the Hagia Sophia, and English sailors in particular loved this, and this millet beer was called Bozza, and that's where we get the word booze from. So it's given us many things, Byzantium, world culture and booze. So it's a city, as I said, which is kind of rich, strategic, a bit of a party place, but also, of course, a city that we think of as a religious centre. So a centre for early Christianity and later a centre for Islam. Now, the bitter truth about this city is that nothing particularly exciting religiously happened there, but its rulers were so in love with the place, they kind of crowbar in religious significance. So they kind of write a religious myth history of the place, including the great emperor, the Roman emperor, Constantine the Great, who is baptized on his deathbed and brings Christianity both to the city and then to the wider Roman world. So Constantine comes to the city, sets it up as a new HQ, renames it Constantinople, and gives it a different religious gloss. And what you're looking at here, if you've been, again, you'll have seen this, is the column of Constantine, still standing, made of porphyry, of this beautiful purple stone. It would have been an incredible column. Originally, it's 115 feet tall now. Originally, it was 160 feet tall, and it was topped by this wonderful statue, which is probably Constantine, Apollo, the Roman sun god Sol Invictus, and possibly Jesus Christ, all sort of wrapped into one figure. You can see that on the right-hand side of the screen. And I love this monument because it's a real magpie monument. It shows us that the rulers of Byzantium are always very smart, and they manage to keep all kinds of interests and belief systems on side. So here, in this particular column, as I said, you have this statue on the top, and we're told that into that beautiful solar crown that the figure is wearing were melded the very nails that nailed Jesus Christ to the cross. As you go further down the column, the axe, ladies and gentlemen, that Noah used to build the ark was buried under the porphyry column. And then, if that wasn't enough, the panniers, the bread baskets that Jesus used to feed the 5,000 were also buried under the column of Constantine. So, as I said, kind of, a lot of religious significance. And then, just to keep the old gods on side, we're told that right underneath the base of the column was buried the Palladium, this statue of Pallas Athena, the great Greek goddess, which Aeneas had brought from Troy, that went to Rome, then came from Rome to Constantinople. So it's a kind of wonderful example of Greek and Roman, pagan and Christian, all kinds of ideas merged into one monument. So and this is what Istanbul, Constantinople, Byzantium does extremely well. What this also tells us is that this is a city with a new ethical centre. From this moment on, particularly with Constantine and then with the later Christian emperors, there's a notion that Istanbul is also a city of sanctuary. Really fascinating, this. That it's a city that enshrines social justice and where you can turn. If you're a refugee and you have a just cause, it's a city that has to take you in. And people write about it. They write about it as a city that has extraordinary liberality to the dispossessed and to the poor. If you were too poor to be buried, then the city would bury you. 80,000 people a day were given bread in the city. And if you came as some kind of refugee, if you could make it into the city gates, then the refugee official, a quaestor, who was established specifically for the city, who still exists as an office in modern-day Istanbul, had to look after you and take you in. So kind of a really interesting, and there are more refugees in Istanbul than there are in any other city from the conflict in Syria at the moment. So it's a characteristic that's lasted. And just to show you here some of the refugees who come to the city, I love this beautiful picture. This is actually from the fallout of the First World War, when a number of Muslim families were killed. And these little Muslim orphans, these kids, just knew that Istanbul would take them in if they managed to make it to the city. So they travelled for about 200 miles by themselves to Istanbul and were housed in the mosques. You can see their bed linen and blankets being dried behind them. There were also, of course, I'm sure you'll all know this, but inhabitants from Rajasthan came to the city of Constantinople and Istanbul in the form of the people that we now call Roma. So these wonderful travelling musicians came to Istanbul through Armenia and Iran. They come to be called Roma in Constantinople because it is the new Rome, the second Rome, and they take over an area called Sulukale, and it's still where the Roma of the city live today. And fantastically, we're told that when they arrived, they were great sieve makers, and the Roma of Sulukale are still sieve makers today. So that's an unbroken tradition across 1,000 years. And there's a rather kind of wonderful anecdote about when they first come, that because this was a city that loved its nature, as I said, it's always there've always been trees and animals have been allowed to inhabit the city as well as an urban space. There was a real problem with aggressive wildlife. And there was one particular emperor who had a zoo. The emperors always kept zoos in Constantinople. And his kind of prize wildlife were being attacked by the actual wildlife in the city. So he summoned up the Roma, as I said, who'd originally come from Rajasthan, because they had such beautiful instruments and cymbal playing, and gets them to walk around his wildlife park like a sort of travelling circus to scare off the wildlife. So as I said, so it's a city that's been consistently tenacious in the way that it's welcomed in travellers and refugees. And we now go back to Theodora, my heroine character, because of all the rulers of Istanbul, Constantinople, she welcomed in refugees more than any other. So just indulge me for a minute while I talk to you about this incredible queen shown in the centre there in a mosaic from Ravenna. So Theodora, oh my goodness, what a girl. So Theodora starts out life, as I said, right at the bottom of the pile. And this is going to get a bit fruity, and I know it's a bit early in the morning to talk about erotic dancing, but you're all grown-ups, so I'll go for it. Theodora was basically an erotic performer in the hippodrome. She used to entertain when the chariot races, in between the chariot races. And she was, I'm not going to go too far, but she was athletic, Theodora, famously athletic, and kind of had a reputation for enjoying the sexual act in all kinds of ways, and I'll leave it to your imagination. But she was also clearly very smart. So as well as being sexy, this is a woman who really has an incredible head on her. And she travels from Constantinople out to the wider dominions of the Byzantium territory. She goes to Alexandria, to North Africa, converts to Christianity, works as a spy for the state, kind of sleeps with men to get their secrets, and basically kind of sleeps her way up higher and higher ranks of officials, makes her way back into Constantinople. And she's the daughter of a bear tamer and a prostitute. She has no family standing at all. But somehow, we can only imagine how, she attracts the attention of the soon-to-be Emperor Justinian, and Justinian falls in love with her and changes the law so that an emperor can marry an actress, in inverted commas. The two marry, and then very swiftly she becomes the empress of this extraordinary empire of Byzantium. And what a couple they are. They are utterly in love. We have these brilliant accounts from courtiers saying it's really annoying because they kiss in corridors the whole time, and then you have eyes for one another, and they're really unprofessional. They're obviously just completely jealous. But they make it their purpose to kind of reform the social standing of the city. And we're talking about the 6th century AD, so 1500 years ago. And a number of their reforms are remarkably ahead of their time. So they increase the penalties for rape. They outlaw infanticide and sex trafficking. They outlaw pimping. Theodora sets up a safe house for fallen women and for single mothers. You know, this is 1,500 years ago. Incredible. Still, the foundations of it still exist in Istanbul. And one of my favourite reforms that she brings in, and you feel this has to have come from some kind of annoying personal experience. It's now becomes law that men can only get into debt if they ask their wives twice, which is brilliant. So I love the idea that, you know, they ask once and they say, oh, you shouldn't really know, so I'm sure she said yes. But now you have to really look your wife in the eye and say, is it okay for me to get into debt? So they kind of change the nature of the city. They make it a very progressive, very connected, very open-hearted city in a way. And a city that still keeps its interests and trading and kind of emotional connections right across the old Roman Empire. So a remarkable pair. And one of the places that they keep a connection to is back in old, dreary, windswept UK. And what you're looking at here is Tintagel. I know there are some Cornish people here, actually, so I don't know. Anyway, so if you're in the audience, this is Tintagel, the fabled seat of King Arthur, right at the edge of Britain in Cornwall. And on this Tintagel headland, which is not very sizable at all, a remarkable thing was discovered. In 1983, there was a scrub fire which burnt away a lot of the grassland, and it revealed storehouses and warehouses from the 6th century AD, which contained huge amounts of pottery all the way from Istanbul, from what was then Constantinople. And we know this because they're stamped with a cross and with the image of Constantinople. And you had to ask yourselves why. So there's more on that tiny headland. There are more Byzantine fragments than there are anywhere else in Western Europe. And the sort of immediate answer that you'd think is because there is tin in Cornwall. So were these ships travelling a 6,000-mile round trip in order to get the tin of Cornwall? Well, possibly. But there's also tin in Afghanistan. If you're in Istanbul, that's a kind of 6-day ride. You don't need to send your boats out. But I think what's happening is that the rulers of Istanbul are reminding themselves that a city only works if it is connected beyond its borders and boundaries. And so there's this remarkable trade with right the way across the old Roman Empire, including to Britain. And again, just quickly want to show you this wonderful necklace has been discovered in Britain that an Anglo-Saxon aristocrat would have worn, exactly the same as the necklace that you've just seen on Theodora in that Ravenna mosaic. So the Anglo-Saxon women of England are going kind of, look, you know, I'm wearing my jewellery just like they do back in the city of Byzantium. And again, just this is very recent archaeology. Some of you might have heard of the Sutton Hoo ship burial in the UK. Well, they've discovered around that burial huge numbers of coins minted in Byzantium, which shows us that traders from the Byzantine Empire were coming and, again, kind of just keeping those connections going. And there's a fantastically patronising law, again, that Justinian and Theodora institute, where they say they're going to hand out subsidies to the barbarians of Britannia. And I love the fact that we were simply barbarians in the eyes of the 6th century Constantinople people. So it's a city that's hyper-connected. It's a beautiful city. This is a graphic representation of the city as it was in the 10th century AD, at which point it is 10 times bigger than any other city in Europe. So it's a city that really matters. But jewels like these inevitably attract thieves. People want to own a beautiful place like this. It's attacked 13 times by Islamic forces and forces from the Arab world. It's also consistently attacked by Vikings. And I think when we think of the city of Istanbul, we don't automatically think of its connection to the Viking world, but of course remember it's connected through the Black Sea to the north by the river Dnieper up into that land. And the Vikings have this kind of brilliant love-hate relationship with the city. They desire it, they want to own it, so they come both as friends and enemies. And one of the reasons they love it is because there's a great trade of silks, famously from Constantinople. And the Vikings, you know, these are supposed to be the bad bully boys of history. Oh my goodness, nothing a Viking loved more than a silk scarf from Istanbul. So when you picture Vikings, instead of, you know, that stereotypical thing, which as we know is completely wrong, of a helmet with horns, actually imagine them wafting around in a lovely purple silk scarf. They used Byzantine silk for their sails, for their boats as well. And at one point, there's again a fantastic codification where the Vikings are allowed in the city. And I don't know, does anybody in the room remember this? I remember it from my childhood. On newsagents, there always used to be a little sign that said that school children could come in, but only if they behaved and they came in 2 at a time. Does anybody remember that? It used to sort of, you know, stop kind of young school lads coming in and wrecking newsagents and nicking sweets. Well, something almost exactly like that happened with the Vikings in Constantinople. So a law was passed that said that 50 Vikings at a time could come into the city, only if they came through a particular gate, and if they didn't rape anybody, they'd be given free bed and breakfast, which I think this is the most kind of fantastic, you know, forward-looking thing. So the Vikings used to trot in and behave, get their silk scarves and leave again. So the Vikings tried to take it over, but never quite managed. But actually the city is one that is then attacked, and it's one of those shameful moments in the story of the world where it's attacked by fellow Christians in the Fourth Crusade. And this is, you know, as a historian, you get slightly, not inured, but saturated with stories of abominable behaviour and destruction. And this is one I still find it very, very hard to wrap my head around, because basically it was as actually with many of the Crusades, it was a crusade just motivated by greed and self-interest. So invading Western Christians come to the city, and they manage to persuade themselves that because in Byzantium and Constantinople they are the wrong kind of Christian, they're justified in attacking the city and claiming it as their own. And this is one of those instances where a lot of the invaders, it's a kind of flip side of history. We always hear famously that the victor holds the pen and writes history. But actually, in this case, most of the invading Franks from the west were illiterate, whereas there's an incredible tradition of literacy for both women and men in Constantinople. So we hear the horror of the invasion by the Western forces. Worse atrocities were in store for the living, tearing children from mothers and mothers from children, treating the Virgin with wanton shame in holy chapels, viewing with fear neither the wrath of God nor the vengeance of men. The Crusaders, in the name of God, destroyed all that they found in their path. There was mass killings. We're told that the rivers of the streets of Constantinople ran with blood, and there was terrible suffering. But something also happens to the city, that those invaders steal the documents, they steal the histories of the city, the parchments, they burn, they take away, they destroy their icons. And from this moment, really, it's a city that kind of loses its sense of itself. It has been confident, outward-looking, open-hearted, open-minded, and you just get the sense that it questions what it is now. So the Franks are there for a number of years, but worse than that, it's a city that's lost its cultural identity, its shared memories, and physically has lost its histories, and it never really recovers from that. So with the advent of the Ottomans 200 years later, in a way it's no surprise that this is a city that actually, I think in many ways, welcomes with open arms the Ottoman Turks from the east. So they've been nibbling around, taking over territories. Eventually Byzantium is really just an island in a kind of sea of Ottoman control. And then, of course, famously in 1453, the Ottomans come. I don't think of this as a clash of civilizations. It feels a lot more, in some ways, like a kind of regime change. There's a lot of communication between the Byzantine inhabitants of the city and the new Ottoman masters. The new Ottoman masters call themselves Caesars, just as the rulers of Byzantium and Constantinople had called themselves Caesars. And yes, there are changes. Yes, Allah is now the god worshipped in the city. Yes, there is death and destruction, but there is more continuity than caesura. And we see this hugely in the culture and architecture of the city. So what I've just shown you here is a kind of wonderful little diary entry from the diary of none other than Leonardo da Vinci. Because when the new Ottoman sultans come, they really want to turn Istanbul into a kind of Renaissance city. To rival all other Renaissance cities of Europe, they commission translations of the Iliad, of the Odyssey, of Shakespeare, and they kind of bring in the greatest architects and artists from across Europe. And one of the sultans launches a bridge building competition in the city over one of its waterways, the Golden Horn, puts out the call, and we get applicants from all over the world. And rather wonderfully, Leonardo da Vinci, who's now become this sort of icon of brilliance, writes, not a man I would say without ego, writes a fantastically patronizing letter to the Sultan of Istanbul. This is what Leonardo writes when he hears about this competition. I, your servant, have heard that you intended to construct a bridge from Istanbul to Galata, but you could not, because no sufficient expert could be found. I, your servant, I am your man, I know how to do it. I will raise an arch so high that nobody would pass over it. I will construct it in such a way that even a sailing ship could pass under it. And you can see on the illustration there, this is actually now held in the Louvre in Paris. Leonardo's drawn the little boat going under the bridge that he's going to design for Istanbul. I am the only man in the known world, and I quote directly, who can build this bridge for you. So Leonardo is obviously very clear that he's going to get the gig. Fabulously, in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, there's a pile of letters about that high, written by want-to-be architects, including the one from Leonardo. And obviously, the Sultan's just gone, Leonardo who? I've got no interest in him at all. And the bridge doesn't get built, and Leonardo doesn't get the gig, although he then goes back to the city later. But it's just a kind of sign of how kind of culturally cosmopolitan this was as a city. So Leonardo tries to build a bridge. But of course, one of the great architects who then succeeds in getting commissions is the wonderful Sinan, whose buildings are still there in modern-day Istanbul. They dot the skyline. And what you're looking at here is the Süleymaniye Mosque from Sinan. His work was described as filled with joy and light and heart captivating, an extraordinary architect. Why I included this is there's been some wonderful work on the dome of the Süleymaniye Mosque, and we've worked out that he invented this incredibly clever thing, which was basically a Helmholtz resonator, again 500 years before they were officially invented, where he puts inverse terracotta pots into the dome. So it creates this kind of wall of sound within the mosque, and 20 men were employed to recite prayers to Allah 3,500 times, so that he would be praised 70,000 times every day within that mosque. And these terracotta pots, 260 of them, reflect the sound back into the space, and visitors talk about this kind of meadow of sound as you walk in. So a place of extraordinary cultural innovation. I'm quickly whizzing through, I'm getting lots of. We're nearly at the end of our time. Again, a beautiful building from Sinan. Again, some new archaeological work on it. This is the Killick Alec Pasha Hammam next to the Killick Alec Pasha Mosque. Killick Alec Pasha being a returning hero from the Battle of Lepanto. And brilliantly, this Hammam was built with 42 layers of a specially designed kind of plaster to keep the health both of the building and of the bathers. So you could bathe inside it and be beautiful, steamy and sweaty, but the building wouldn't crumble. So a place of great cultural innovation. And I promised that I would talk a little bit about the women of the city. So we've heard about the goddesses and the great Theodora. And the power of women in the city continues through into the Ottoman world. As I said, this wasn't something I knew before I researched the book, so I wasn't looking for it. But it's very clearly there. So here you're looking at the famous harem of the city, the Sultan's harem, tended to by the black eunuch, who is on the left of the screen. This is an early 18th century watercolour. And the harem is a place where women have really quite extraordinary standing and status. When we say the word harem, we can sometimes imagine, have a sort of Pavlovian response and think of those frankly quite ghastly orientalizing oil paintings of the 18th and 19th centuries of women naked oiling one another or kind of washing one another. Most of the time in the harem they kept their clothes on, I can tell you, and it was more like a kind of royal household. And it could be a terrible place to be if you were a woman. You could end up the slave of a slave, or it could be a remarkable place, because in Islam women can inherit money, so there are women with a lot of money there. And I'm just going to finish with a case study of one particular woman who I think in a way kind of encapsulates the character of the city. So a fantastic creature called Safiye. Safiye was taken originally as a Christian slave from Albania. She ends up in the harem, and Safiye means pleasing one. So she was obviously very, very beautiful. She rises absolutely to the ultimate position in the Ottoman court. She is the mother of the Sultan, originally the first Sultan's favourite, and then the mother of the new Sultan. And she has quite remarkable influence. So she sort of semi-runs the city. And we know this partly because she has a wonderful correspondence with Queen Elizabeth I of England. And basically, so you've got to sort of picture this. You've got Queen Elizabeth from Britain, a concubine in the harem. And they set up this as I said, correspondence where basically you can read between the lines. They're basically saying, listen, the men are kind of mucking things up, frankly, so let's just sort out international politics between us and it will all be okay. So they engage in competitive gift-giving. They give one another towels, and then the other gives the second a tiara, and then they give them a golden carriage. So they sort of do that female thing of sort of trying to outdo one another in presents. And then I just want to read you this wonderful letter written by Safiye, the concubine, to Elizabeth I in 1593. I can repeatedly mention Her Highness's gentility and praise at the foot dust of His Majesty, the sovereign, so this is the Sultan, who has Alexander's place. So isn't that interesting that the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan, is being described as an inheritor of Alexander the Great? I shall endeavour for your aims. Your letter has arrived and reached us, God willing. Action will be taken according to what you said. So Safiye is basically saying, forget the vizier, forget the sultan, I'll sort out what you want to do. And actually what they're doing is sorting out a new trading agreement, which is obviously what we're going to have to do post-Brexit with Turkey, and allowing for the ransoming of pirates who've been taken by Turkish forces. English sailors are being kind of returned. And again, they're sorting out a new kind of economic policy. May we always be firm in friendship, God willing, may our friendship never die. And then, at the end of this letter, well, I said they basically sorted out kind of international economic and political and social affairs. Dare I say, because they are women, there is a PS, and they start to exchange makeup tips. So at the end of the letter, Safiye now writes, "Oh, Your Majesty, on account of Your Majesty being a woman, I hear there are to be found in your kingdom rare distilled waters of every kind for the face and odoriferous oils for the hands. Oh, Your Majesty would favour me by sending some to me, to my hand only," because she's obviously realised she's in the harem and they might get nicked by some of the other concubines, "directly to me, Safiye, because, being articles for ladies, she does not wish these treasures to pass through other hands." So it's just a tiny moment. It's a little PS on the end of a letter. But for me, that tells me why Istanbul matters and why we should love it, because it is a city where men and women of many degrees have had a chance to fulfill their potential, to become somebody. It's a city of brio and brilliance. It's a city described as a diamond between two sapphires and two emeralds, Allah's city, the threshold, Zion's city. It's belonged to so many people. Napoleon said that if the world were one country, then Istanbul would be its capital. It's also been described as a virgin who's enjoyed many husbands. So it's a city which I love, because for me, it's a city that really incarnates the possibilities of being a cosmopolitan. It's a city that welcomes influence across borders and boundaries. And actually, the man who invented this notion of the cosmopolitan, the citizen of the world, passed through Istanbul. So I love it for many ways. I love Jaipur. I also love Istanbul. And I love it because I think its history teaches us what it is to be a true world citizen. Thank you. Have we got time? Oh, okay. I think they're all going. Yeah, so just tell them I'll be doing it.
We wish to thank Bettany Hughes, Tom Holland, and Aga Khan Foundation for this very enriching session. Do note that Bettany Hughes will be available to sign her books. She'll also be interacting with you at the book signing area, which is right in front of Charbagh. So you could maybe line up there so that it happens systematically. And thank you so much for being a great audience. The festival brochure and flyer with the full program are available for purchase at the JCB Prize for Literature bookshop managed by Full Circle. You can also grab a copy of your favorite book while you're there. Please help us in keeping the venue clean and dispose any waste items in the bins placed all across the Palace. Please tweet using hashtag JaipurLitFest 2020 or tag @ZJaipurLitFest. The next session at Charbagh is session number 87, Climbing the Mango Trees, Food and Memory, and would begin shortly. Kindly note that the festival venues are in the no smoking zone, and we request you not to smoke in public places. Yes. We can't announce somebody who's coming. Listen. Don't forget to book your tickets for the music stage. We have it today for the last time at Clark's Amir for this year. It starts from 6:30 onwards. Thank you.